Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Wandering Road podcast. I'm your host Chris, alongside my co-host Dean, and for today's episode, we have a pretty special one. This is our first listener submission that we received from a gentleman named Connor, all the way from Belfast, Northern Ireland. So, Dean, the way that this started was I received a message on TikTok, and actually it was a comment to one of the clips that we post on there. And this person said, "Hey, I have all of these stories. Do you mind if I send them to you?" And I was like, "Look, absolutely, you can send them to us. This is what we're here for." So they took us up on our offer and they submitted quite a few stories for us to go through tonight. As I was reading them before we got started with the show, some of them are quite interesting and I can't wait to get started. But how are you doing today, buddy?
Yeah, this is exciting. I especially because the individual who wrote to us is coming from so far away in a different part of the world with a lot of rich history. And, as we know, we talked to Trev and that really awesome, super long episode 50 podcast. And if you're not familiar, if you didn't hear that one, Trev is from Ireland and we talked a lot about Irish lore. And I always both of us, I feel like, when have you never met a person who didn't like to talk about Ireland? Like, it's just, I know it's probably different for people who live there because it always is, different. It's less magical when you actually live in the place. Like, I know I live in Hawaii. People are always like, "Oh my God, you live in paradise." I'm like, yeah, it's really great most of the time, but it's also like where normal people live and normal things happen. But I just feel like having someone write in from Ireland is always exciting because there's so much history that can be touched on and talked about, especially stuff you don't know. So it looks like there's some background in this historical background that we'll go into. But did anything else jump out to you about this particular write-in up front?
There's a lot of talk of either shadow people or the Hat Man. So that seems to be a little bit of a common theme that we'll see in a couple of these stories. And
I had never heard of the Hat Man before this. Have you?
Yeah, I have actually.
Oh, okay.
So the Hat Man, for those of you that are not familiar, is essentially like this shadow person that has a hat. I guess it looks like some sort of like top hat or something like that. And
it says here in the thing it's a fedora, or like fedora. In the story. Yeah, he said he saw the thing wearing a fedora. That's a stylish ghost right there. It's a stylish
I know,
ghost.
Right? If it even is a ghost, it might be some sort of entity that we don't know about.
It's really funny real quick. I just have to say this because I had never heard of the Hat Man, and I literally typed into Google Hat Man of Ireland, and there's a clothing company that makes tweed hats. It's called Hat Man of Ireland. And I'm just imagining like, oh, that's where the Hat Man is actually the CEO. He owns the company, and he's just like, he's got part-time. He's the ghost scaring the shit out of people. The other time he's the CEO, like, trying out all these cool hats and scaring the shit out of people. They are some cool hats.
Yeah, they do look pretty cool. But let's jump into the first story. And again, these are from Connor, who is from Belfast, Northern Ireland. So the first story that he submitted to us, we titled Shadow Spirit or Demon. So these stories are written the way that Connor sent them to us. So it's 2005. I'm 15. It's summer or springtime, and I went to my ex-girlfriend's house. It was in Edenderry Village, Belfast. The houses there are about 150 years old. A very old place, close to a paranormal spot called the Giant Rings. Anyway, I knew she wasn't in, and I'm friends with her brother, who is also staying at his girlfriend's house at the time. I also knew that my girlfriend's house was empty at the time because her mother was out with her boyfriend. So I decided to climb into the back window to get into the house. The window was literally right beside her bunk bed, which was around 7 feet in height, which is an important detail later. So I got into the house and was chilling for a few hours by myself, completely bored. Then all of a sudden, I heard banging, very loud banging from downstairs. I went down to check, but there was nothing. Nobody was there, and it was late at night as well. So I went back upstairs, read a magazine, played the guitar a little bit, and as I was mucking about, I heard more banging. This was probably like an hour later or so. I then remember hearing the door that led to the upstairs being opened, and I heard heavy footsteps coming up the staircase. It stopped about halfway. At that point, I freaked out and climbed onto the top of the bunk bed. I hid under the blankets. The room was already pretty messy, so I thought I could conceal myself as the place was covered in clothes, teddy bears, etc. I initially thought someone had broken into the house, so I hid under the blankets for a bit. And then I heard the footsteps again. I hear them stop outside of the bedroom door, which was closed. I think a few minutes had gone by at that point, and I was completely terrified. Then the door swung open with a lot of force. Now I remember that I was facing the wall to my left, still under the blankets. I figured the sensible thing to do would be to play dead or pretend to sleep. Then I heard a terrifying growl. I thought maybe it was her mom, probably drunk or something. She was an alcoholic, or maybe some druggie had broken in. It stood there for a long time, like 10 minutes or so. All the time I could hear these weird sounds, and I could feel a heavy dark presence in the room. I was struck with fear. It slowly began walking towards the bed. I felt it touch the bed, and it started to shake the bed. I could feel it really close to me. An alarm started going off in my head because her mom is 5'5", and this felt like someone 8 foot or taller, breathing and growling near me. It began pulling away my blankets. With a big pull and a tug, the blankets were off. So I thought to myself, what do I do? So I thought to myself, turn around and just yell out, boo. I know that sounds stupid, but I thought that it was hopefully my girlfriend's mother. Also, she didn't know I'd be in the house. As I went to turn around and yell out boo, holy fuck. A goddamn 8 foot tall or so red fiery coal burning eyes are staring at me. Black as the deepest black I have ever seen in the dark. Its face was horrific. A crooked wide mouth. It started reaching at me. Now let me state this. It was emitting hate, fear, and anger like an aura. The light dimmed around it like it was absorbing light or something. It was like smoky, sharp edges around it, but smoke in appearance in its physical form. I went to leap up and scream, but before I could do that, it used magic or something that made me unable to scream. Then it slammed me to the bed and began sucking out my energy or soul. I felt like a battery being drained. My God, I couldn't move. It felt like a huge weight on my body. I have had sleep paralysis before, but this felt very different. It projected images into my head of gory horror film stuff, which scared me more. It seemed to enjoy that and feed off of my fear. It seemed to be in my mind picking out stuff I have seen. It almost seemed to back off a bit, taking in my fear, feeding on the awful negative stuff and my fear. I then felt like I couldn't move and I was dying. I was fighting with all my might. It seemed surprised at my energy, to be honest. I'm a very energetic person, and I would say I do get scared, but don't back down. I started to say, God or Jesus help me. I'm not super religious, but I literally was dying. I'd do anything to save myself. Then I shot up like its release from me was gone. I turned to face it, standing up on the bed. The demon or the shadow man was huge. It projected hate, and it looked pissed that I broke away from it. Then I stood, eye to eye, staring at it, and it backed off slowly, fading away like a wispy smoke, then puff. It was gone. Holy fuck, my friend. I've never had seen any hallucinations, but I know I saw something that night.
You, sir, are a natural storyteller. That was actually really good. I actually enjoyed hearing that story from your voice than echoing in my head as I was reading it earlier.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I mean, aside from the super smooth storytelling skills you got there, this actually gave me a little bit of goosebumps. This is one story that, like, just the fact that he went into such detail, and it was actually pretty well written in terms of painting a picture. So I tend to, like, when I read stories like that, when they're they flow pretty well and they have like a significant amount of details but not too much detail, I think I tend to like pay a good amount of credence to it. So I just, that's the first thing that jumped out to me. But if I can just address something really quickly, I think we can't talk about these stories without actually touching on the location where he's coming from and where these things happened. And that actually piqued, that's the first thing that piqued my interest whenever I started reading this. So it seems like he is, I don't know if there's more than one village, but it seems like he's from, or he said that he's from Edenderry. I don't know if I said that right. Edenderry, Edenderry village,
I
which
think
is in
that's where
Belfast.
the house was his ex-girlfriend's house. So I'm assuming she
Okay.
lived there. Yeah.
So I typed it into Google Maps, and yeah, so just looking at the maps, it seems like that's directly south of Belfast, or maybe within the city limits of Belfast. And I'm familiar. I think almost everyone has heard of Belfast before, but I never heard of Edenderry Village, which is obviously, it's a small little area just south of there. But one thing that jumped out to me when I was looking at the landscape, like if you go to Google Maps and you turn on the layers and see the satellite imagery, it's so fascinating to see. Like, I've never zoomed in from a satellite image on Northern Ireland. It looks so starkly different. The greens, like the vibrant greens and the way things are laid out, like the farmland, the way they structure it, it's kind of like a mishmash. It almost looks like a petri dish, which, I always thought looked kind of cool, but that's the first thing that jumped out. But then there's one more funny thing that really like hit me when I was looking at the areas. Like, how, like, and this is a perfect segue into talking about the history and how the history can really drive like spirit stories and spooky stories and whatnot, and really delve into that ancient kind of feeling. You'll see like a lot of really cool, like really old named stuff, but then like next to more modern stuff. And I just think that that's so different than where you and I grew up. So it's like we're reading and it's like, I could just imagine someone telling a story, and I'm not going to do a shitty Irish accent, but like I just imagine someone going like, "Ah, yeah, I made my way along the Ballinahati Road, past the giant circle, and then on my way to the ASM Lawnmower Engineering Company."
ASM
or,
lawnmower.
or even better, I found a better one. It's like, I crossed over the ancient river Lagan on the Gilchrist Bridge on my way to Scrub and Sparkle. And it's just like, I feel like if there's any reason why like people would get haunted a lot in a place like this, it's because the old ghosts and the old spirits are just pissed off that they have to haunt in a place called like some place near called Clean and Sparkle or Scrub and Sparkle or whatever, or ASM Lawnmowing Engineering.
Right.
But I don't know. That just popped in my head.
Yeah, and thinking back to the history in general, I just draw back to what Trev told us. Like the island itself has a very rich history of superstition and a pagan past. So you can never discredit that type of stuff when you hear people tell stories like this. Because yeah, it may have been a shadow person, it may have been a hat man, it could have been a demon, judging by the fiery eyes that he described it with. But I don't know, dude. It's so creepy.
I think one thing to consider is the fact that he was by himself, and he seemed like he was really just laying back and just chilling, like he said, was kind of just mucking about, reading magazines, playing the guitar. Now, here's the thing. If he was playing the guitar, I imagine, when you play guitar, you're not quietly strumming along and looking at these buildings. These aren't really huge buildings. They're pretty, relatively modestly sized flats, and they seem like they're adjacent to each other. So it's not like, it's almost certain that if he was playing the guitar, that whatever was downstairs would have known he was up there, unless it didn't have like ears or listening in the same way that we do. But it just, I mean, honestly, I guess if it's a spirit or an entity, it probably would have sensed his presence anyway. But just the fact that he was playing a guitar, that just says to me that whatever was downstairs was just fucking with him, because it knew he was up there the whole time. So, I don't know. That's like, what do you think about, like, why wouldn't the thing, because he said he went down the stairs first, or halfway down the stairs, or he went downstairs to check and there was nothing there the first time, right? And then he went back upstairs and continued mucking about and having fun. So that means that whatever this thing was, it wasn't visible to him in that moment, because it was making sounds before. He went downstairs, there was nothing in this, potentially small flat downstairs. So what does that mean? Did it come out of the ether, like the ethereal plane, or like from another dimension, and then return to that? But like, why did it take physical human form? Why did it make heavy footsteps? These are all questions that, like, I just can't help but think. I mean, what do you think about the actual physical aspects of this experience?
I think when you take all of that into consideration, he said that the thing fed off of his fear. I think it was trying to scare him and get him all riled up, by intimidating him with the footsteps and the banging. Put that little seed of doubt in your mind, like maybe there is something here and I can't see what it is, and it's freaking terrifying. And I think from there, that's where it feeds off of the negative energy. And also, you got to think about it. He's a kid, 15 years old. He's a kid. So, I mean, at 15, when I experienced what I experienced, holy fuck, was I scared. Yeah, absolutely.
By the way, I think it's funny that his first, he was inclined to, as a 15-year-old, just turn around and go boo. I feel like that's exactly what I would have done. Like, for real. Like, I literally would have done that in that situation, because I could think exactly as he was thinking as a 15-year-old, because I was there. I was the same type of kid. It was like, oh, you're about to face something like really heavy. So it's like your last semblance of holding on to your youth and innocence. It's just like, okay, maybe I'll just shout, maybe I'll just turn around and throw a boo, and we'll just have fun and they'll laugh it off, and then turn around and it's like, oh nope, surprise, demon face right in your, staring right at you.
Like fucking bright red eyes burning with the fires of hell coming at you.
Yeah. God damn, man. 15 years old. I don't know. That's really hard to,
dude, that'd be rough to process.
The worst thing, I'm trying to think of the worst thing I think I ever experienced growing up of like pure fear wasn't seeing something, but it was like feeling something. And that is like being, like being pinned down by bullies or whatever. Or being like, one time I accidentally locked myself in my mom's trunk of her car.
I'm sorry.
I know. Believe me, man, it doesn't sound as stupid as it's not as stupid as it sounds, really, because honestly, I think I was like 8, or no, I was younger than that. I think I was like 6 or 7, and I had like a friend over, and we were playing this game called like Escape the Cave or something. And if you're not familiar with old cars, like if you're like in your mid to late 20s or older, you probably remember cars like this. But we used to have cars back in the day that had like a separate lock for the trunk, right? Like there was either a button, or like you needed a legit key to open the boot of the trunk or the boot of the car. So like I wasn't quite that old where you needed a key, but there was a push button, and that was the only way. And this is before they had escape hat. Like now, I think if there is a car with an enclosed trunk that has a lock facing the rear seats, there has to be some legally. I think there has to be some kind of escape pull, like something in there that allows you to pull to open the trunk from the inside. But back then, they didn't have that. We actually had this game. My friend and I would like go into the trunk, and we would make sure we'd open up the back seat a little bit, so it would be just cracked open a bit to push open after. But we'd get into the dark cave and then close the trunk and be stuck inside, and then we'd push out and escape the cave through the rear seat. Well, one of our dumbasses, probably me, forgot to press the back seat hard enough. So we got into the trunk, closed the trunk, and then realized that the seat was locked in the back. And I just remember just being, I think that was the first time in my life I was awashed with panic. Like I literally had a mini panic attack as a 7-year-old, thinking like, oh shit, I'm going to die in here. And then miraculously, my mom just happened to be coming down to feed the dog like 5 minutes later. So it was like 5 minutes of torture, but we did get out obviously okay. But I just think back to that moment and like, I wonder if we could have run out of oxygen, like, I mean, we would eventually have been found maybe like a few hours later because she would have checked us on by then. But like seriously, that scares the shit out of me to this day. And I'll tie it back to the story. Like, this kid or this guy talking about this experience as a kid, having that's probably, I imagine that's the first time he was awashed with just arresting fear. And that is really formative. So that's why I give a lot of credibility to this story, that something happened, because like for him to go into such detail, he definitely remembers it very well and definitely thinks about it. You don't forget that. Like the trunk story, you don't forget that.
Doesn't matter how old you are. When you're struck with fear, you don't forget that shit at all, dude. So the next story that we're going to cover two of them. The second one is a pretty short one where Connor, tells us about him and his brother's experience of seeing a hat man appear in their room. And then we're going to follow up right after that with a hat man experience that he went through when he was around 21 years old. So this experience is when he's a kid. And he says, I have seen the red-eyed hat man as a child in my room too. My brother shared the room and saw another shadow man, a tall man. Interesting to note, my brother said that its head was weird and shaped like a pumpkin. I've never heard of this feature or detail until I read another story years ago that said the same thing my brother said. There were a lot of negativities in my childhood home and in my ex-girlfriend's house as well. The same ex-girlfriend, we experienced more paranormal stuff when we were 21, around the year 2011 and 12, in a flat in Belvoir Estate, Belfast. So in that flat, there was another hat man sighting. We saw him. A group of friends saw him too, on a baby monitor. Now this time, he was walking up the stairs towards the bathroom. He looked almost like static, all black too, but emitting static around him. The lights would dim, he had a fedora and a trench coat, and he would enter our bedroom. Months later, me and my ex are sleeping. It's pitch black, and we couldn't see a thing in our huge room. But we could hear footsteps in our room walking up and down all night. Another time, the ex began staying with her mom. She started getting bite marks. All the girls that stayed over did as well, her friends included. I don't know what that means, but I'm gonna keep going. I don't know what you mean by that, Connor. All the girls. They would end up with scratch marks. I actually thought they were bullshitting me because I was still skeptical of the paranormal until one day we went out and came back. The neighbor outside said they were shocked to see us and said that they thought we were inside of the house killing each other because they heard blood-curdling screams. Our next door neighbor one day offered us tea, which I think is dinner, right? because she wanted to tell us about the room we were in. She said it was very haunted, and she's been hearing screams in there for years. We would hear chanting on our baby monitor. My girlfriend's daughter would play peekaboo with an invisible friend. Electrical equipment would turn on even though it wasn't plugged in. Hey, I experienced that before. It really sucks. Chairs would stack on top of each other. Teacups, lighters, etc. would go missing and then randomly turn up again. It ended up being quiet for a few months until I began having a nightmare of an old woman coming to my bedroom, walking out of the bathroom, covered in water, and then jumping on my bed, stabbing me. Then the scariest thing happened to me. I was on my own at 1 a.m. showering. I heard heavy sounding footsteps, so I turned off the water. The steps continued until it was outside of the bathroom door. I could see the shadow of the feet under the light of the door and the light bulb dimming. The bathroom door had a window at the top. I called out for my girlfriend. There was no answer. I called out for my brother. No answer. After about 5 minutes, the door handle began to ferociously rattle like someone was trying to break in. Now, as this was happening, I could feel a high-pitched thing in my ears, or a vibrational feeling, or a hum. The door handle was going nuts. I've never seen a handle rattle like that, and so fucking fast. Now I go, get the fuck away, motherfucker, ready to fight this thing butt-ass naked. But as I opened the door, no one was there. I checked the front door, etc., and they were all locked. But when I got to my bedroom, it was completely trashed. Objects scattered around the room. I could still feel that evil energy.
These are some really interesting details about the story, in terms of what he was experiencing. It doesn't seem like it's obviously not one experience or even one long experience. It's a bunch of different things. So I always wonder, maybe this is an indication that he and the people around him, or the energy that's around him, makes everyone within that bubble more prone to experiencing things. That's the first thing I think of. I also think it's really interesting and kind of, I'm sorry to, Connor, I know these things that you experienced are they are actually heavy experiences and they're not fun. But I guess that's just my way of kind of, we all deal with things differently, like stories differently. So sometimes I poke fun the story or kind of joking around about it. But I do understand that in terms of gravity, these are things that wouldn't be fun to experience if you're in them. But I have to say that the neighbor, one thing you mentioned in the story was that when you were staying in the flat with your ex-girlfriend and you went over to the neighbor's house for tea time or whatever, and they were just casually chatting. I just think it's kind of messed up, but kind of funny, but really messed up that you moved into this place, you probably signed a lease and no one mentioned anything. And it's oh, sweetie, by the way, I've been hearing screams in your flat for 3 years. It's well, shit. Oh, God damn it.
Kind of a minor detail they forgot to mention.
Yeah, the landlord didn't mention that. Go through the clause and see there's no ghost release section or boilerplate or something. That's just I feel for you, man. That sucks. I don't know, Chris, you've had some crazy stories about what you experienced in the past. I don't think I really have a lot of I've heard okay, so the craziest thing that I can talk about, which isn't really crazy, it's actually kind of sad. I thought for sure that I experienced a ghost once in my house, my mom's old house in Western Pennsylvania. I was 15 years old and I was on the couch.
You never told me this.
Well, I didn't tell you this because it's a stupid story that is, you'll see why in a second.
Okay. It was a dog sport. Go ahead.
It's actually kind of even worse. It's not really worse than that. It's kind of innocent, but there's an explanation without ruining it first. But okay, so I'm laying on the couch, right? And this happened over the course of a few nights. The first night, or the first evening, I should say, I think my mom was out. I think I was there by myself, actually. It was 7 or 8 p.m. I was on the couch, getting ready to crash. I was dozing off. And then I start to hear like some rustling down on the landing. So if you imagine like my mom's old house, like it was my childhood home. It was built in like 1989 or something, not terribly old, but pretty old when this happened. And it's a 2-story house with a basement. So, or I should say, no, sorry, it's like you walk in through the front door and then you go up a flight, like a short flight of stairs, and that's the first floor. But if you go to the left and then down the stairs from the front door, that's the basement. There's a landing at the front door where the stairs either go up or down. And my mom always used to keep like knickknacks and candy and stuff at the front door entrance. So this particular time, she had like a bowl of M&Ms there, and I was on the couch and I was just like trying to fall asleep or whatever. And I heard like rustling down there, and I'm like, and I wake up and I'm like, oh, I thought I heard something. And I'm listening. I don't hear anything. Start to doze off again. And then I hear it again. It's even louder. And I immediately knew the second time what it was. It sounded like somebody was reaching their hands into the bowl of M&Ms, which is a sound I heard many, many times over the years. My friends coming over, reaching their fingers into the bowl and shattering the candy around in the glass jar. And I'm like, what the fuck? There's no one here. Why am I hearing a hand reach into the jar of M&Ms? So I kind of like did that thing as a kid, like where you freeze and you're just listening and you're like hoping that you're just hearing things. And you'd like, maybe I was half dreaming. And then I didn't hear anything again. I'm like, okay. So I let it go. The next night, it was on my mind. And same thing happened. I think my mom was home that night, but she was in another room. And I start to relax or fall asleep or whatever, or just like watching TV, half awake, and I hear the same sound, but this time I hear the in the glass jar, and then I hear a clunk 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 clunk, and I'm like, that is a fucking piece of candy. I'm not saying this to myself as a 15-year-old, but that was like, that was a piece of candy falling out of the bowl and hitting the ground. And I went over, and sure enough, there was an M&M that had fallen out of the glass seemingly by itself and rolled along the floor. And then at this point, I'm convinced, like, finally, I'm going to experience something supernatural. Like, this is something crazy, like spiritual or whatever going on. I'll just cut to the chase and not bore people with the rest of the story. It ended up being a fucking mouse in our house that was getting into the candy in the open bowl of candy. Because we saw it like the next night, like 3 nights later. I actually think I set up like, I think I put blankets over myself and I was like peeping at it one night, like trying to test and see what it was, if I could see it move by itself. And then I saw the mouse and I'm like, oh, God damn it. No ghost for me. But this is a different story. This is like he has multiple people experiencing it. I'm pretty sure, I'm actually certain that a mouse cannot rattle the door like that. So I don't know. I do give a lot of credibility to this story. It's definitely something that is freaky, and it seems like it's more than just happenstance or something that's explainable.
Yeah, if you're ready to fight with someone ass naked, I like
look at Winston Churchill. Have you ever heard that story?
No,
So
what story about Churchill? Okay,
really quickly. Winston, I don't know if this is a true story or not, but it's always one of my favorite, like, really famous or well-known, like, history leaders or whatever experiencing ghost stuff. But apparently Winston Churchill, I don't know if it was like during World War II or like right after World War II. I don't know how long he lived after World War II, but like, so apparently he stayed in the White House at some point in his life, as a senior statesman. And he told this story, apparently, at one point in his life. He said that he was staying in like the Lincoln suite or like some, guest suite in the White House. And he was in the bathtub completely naked, taking a bath as a man does, naked or whatever. And he said he got out of the bathtub stark naked at night, and I think he had a little bit to drink. I think he was famous for his whiskey or something, or like, some kind of liquor. And he was kind of like semi intoxicated, at least. He said he saw the ghost of Abraham Lincoln standing before him, looking at him. And he said that he looked at himself naked. He looked at Abraham Lincoln, looked at himself naked, looked at Abraham Lincoln, and then proceeded to say something along the lines of, well, Mr. President, it seems you have me at a disadvantage. I always wish that if I like experienced a ghost or something, I would have the wherewithal and the calmness and the wit to respond like that. Because at least if you're going to die from a ghost, like, you can go out kind of like a bro. I don't know.
And naked.
Like, it sounds like that's what Connor did. Cheers to you, Connor, going out trying to fight a ghost naked.
Ghost naked.
That's how we all want to go. You reached into Churchill there.
Right. The next story that Connor has in store for us tonight is titled Shadow Person by the Cottage. So Connor states, I haven't had much experiences with shadow people in a while, but I did see one outside of Loch Pepper's cottage in Belfast. This was last February 11th, 2023, around 11:10 p.m. It was a dark, cold night, and this place is in a forest, so it's creepy as fuck to begin with. It was me and my brother. As we get near the bridge, it walked towards me, and I'm assuming that's the shadow person. I thought it was some dude walking, but no way that would be the case at this time of night. As it walked, it glitched in and out, almost impossible the way it moved and walked. It got about 100 feet away, turned off into the bushes, and disappeared. Funnily enough, there is a photo in the cottage of a person standing exactly where I saw this shadow person. It was probably the ghost of the lock keeper. A few things to note. These things are super dark in appearance. They radiate or emit fear. A bizarre, unexplainable fear. The eyes on them. I've never heard anyone see what I described before. The eyes were fiery like coal burning. Most important thing of all in all of this is that I was awake.
So as you were reading that story, I was actually looking up. I was trying to find Loch Pepper's cottage, but I think that just for to clarify, I think there was a typo. I think it's actually Lock Keeper's cottage in Belfast, because that's what I got when I searched up
Lock
or
keepers.
searched.
Okay, so it might have been
Yeah,
a typo.
yeah,
On
sorry,
his
people.
part.
It's a typo, not Lock Pepper's, which I thought sounded to me like it could be legit, but it's actually Lock Keeper's cottage in Belfast. And as you were reading that story, I had found, if you Google images of, just type in Lock Keeper's cottage Belfast, and the first few hits are like the most quaint, ancient looking, gorgeous, small cottages, like homes or whatever I've ever seen. Like I would pay to stay in a house or like a little cottage like that in Ireland. That looks so, of course, people like, from people who live in Ireland are probably, what are you, crazy? Like that house is shite. Like, but to me as an American, like that looks so cool. Like that cottage, like it's so old and like historic and stuff. And it looks like a really cool place to spend a night or two, especially out in like the nature. Like the nature is so green, and there's like a old bridge over a river and stuff like that. So my dumb ass would be staying in like a cottage like this and like, oh, and like, getting attacked by fairies and leprechauns the next day, and just being like a pile of ash the next morning. But yeah, I can just imagine the static of like a staticky being coming out of the wood line, the tree line, or around one of these really old buildings. That fits the narrative of the experience. And I have to also wonder, like, why static? If it's a staticky being, that kind of says to me that it's like in between realities or in between dimensions or something like that. Like it's not totally corporeal, it's not totally physical. And I don't know, what's your take on beings that look staticky, like in this story, where it's not quite physical, not quite, just ethereal?
What about the idea that it's like a ripple through time?
Okay.
We talked about time slips, right?
Or residual hauntings or something like that?
Or something residual, but more so like maybe it's not a dead person or a spirit, but more so in that particular moment, for some reason, like the plane, I don't want to say the planes, but like time like warps or something like that, and you get like a faint look into the past of someone crossing that bridge the same time that they're crossing the bridge, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way that I could rationalize the static look around it. Or maybe it was just a spirit that's just staticky.
No, I don't know. And here is another good question. I meant to ask this earlier, and maybe you can shed some more depth to this question. Being a historian, I mean, I know you're not probably. It's probably hard to find somebody spun up on their ancient Irish history. But if we were thinking, so jumping back to Connor's previous story about the baby monitor and hearing chanting, one question that came to my mind when I read that was like, so, and it kind of ties into this entire experience that Connor was going through over the number of years in and around southern Belfast. What ancient organized groups that incorporated chanting and or spirituality or whatever, who were
Druids.
around? Okay, so Druids, Wiccans?
Wiccan is a more modern type of thing.
Okay.
But Druids. It would have been Druids.
Okay.
There weren't like... So at that time, so this is based off of what I know when it comes to Roman clashes with Celtic peoples. And fortunately or unfortunately, the Romans never made it to Ireland, the island. And maybe, like, not maybe, but there would have been some sort of influence, Celtic influence with Druids and that type of stuff. Because Druids were responsible for they were pretty important in Celtic society in the ancient times. So you're talking about 100 BCE. You're talking about, the time of Julius Caesar. That's the only thing I could draw on. And of course, when you have like religious beliefs like that, like with Druids and priests and all these different beliefs, there's always some sort of chanting going on or something equivalent. So that's the only thing that I could really think of.
I just quickly typed in because I had heard of the Druids before, and I think I'm probably going to get sniped for this, but didn't they have direct impact on like stuff like the Stonehenge, like creating Stonehenge and like the Druids? Like one theory that we have today about why Stonehenge was constructed was because it was a mechanism for chanting, for kind of reverberating sounds and getting into a super ultra aware or kind of almost like drug-like state that you could try to induce in somebody when you're chanting over and over again. I think that's fascinating. I don't know exactly what they believed in per se. I think it was polytheism, believing in multiple deities and gods. Okay, so it wasn't really dualistic like we've talked about before. It's cosmology, but divination and prophecy. So it's not, I could see how the Catholic Church or, Christianity would want to demonize something like that. But to me, it's almost like Wiccanism or whatever, where it's, it could be demonized in a certain lens, but in reality, at the very core, it's not based off of anything inherently evil. So that's kind of like, why would the Druids be responsible, or residual Druid hauntings be responsible for cultivating these negative entities? Which is why my next question is going to pivot to, when did devil worship take hold in Europe? And I know Ireland is too specific, but like, because I mean, like, look, we have modern devil worshippers today that we've talked about before, but like, I wonder, historically speaking, when did you get the counter narrative in places like Ireland? Because that's the next thing I jump to when I think about evil entities from an ancient time. If it's not being driven by old practices of Druids or whatever, who aren't, as a baseline evil, just like Wiccans or whatever, or any other, ancient religion, it's not created for the sake of destruction or death. It's just incorporating that. So like, I don't know. I have to wonder, like, why would these residual terrible things be experienced by people to this modern day? Like, what would be the harbinger or the generator of that experience?
Well, to answer your question about devil worship, the first recorded example of that sort of accusation took place in Toulouse in 1022. So that,
okay,
yeah. So
1022.
Yep. So that's like the first written account of someone actually being accused of that. But when you talk about devil, like, see, that's really difficult because what we're speculating is maybe it has nothing. Well, let me put it this way. So maybe the speculation is it's not necessarily residual druid haunting from like 2030 years ago, but more so, it could have been a possibility that what happened in that flat, maybe there were some teenagers that thought it would be cool to mess around with Satanism and like rituals or
summoning.
something of that sort.
Sure.
And maybe someone unfortunately passed away or that type of energy just stayed around. So that's the only thing I could really think about with the chanting, because now that I think back to like the druids and stuff like that, you're talking about something that happened 2 millennia ago.
Yeah.
And it would have had to have been a very strong energetic force for it to linger that long. So it may.
Here's another.
Yeah, go ahead.
It may. What I was just going to say. Here's another interesting thing. You said the first documented case of possible Satanism was around like 1,000 or so current era, modern era. It says here, based off of what I searched for, that the Druids phased out around the 8th century current era. So, I mean, that's kind of a good amount of time before that first instance, but on the grand scheme of religion and timeline, like human religious timeline or whatever, it's not really that crazy of a difference in time scale. So you're talking about a few hundred years after the Druids died out, Christianity spread about, and then you get the first stories of Satanism. But here's another interesting idea that might be in play with stories like the Hat Man or the smoky 7-foot creature that stared him in the eyes and tried to suck out his soul. It could be not necessarily Satanism directly, but it could be something where it's like, imagine somebody from an ancient religion like Druid or some other belief structure or even entity would want to take retribution or get retribution or harm or take action against the culture like Christianity itself. So imagine like there's like no tie back to Christianity as the end all be all religion, right? But in their mind is whatever powerful entity can conjure these things. It's more just like guy A or like, person from country A is angry at person from country B. So let me send a bunch of guys over to slaughter all the people in country B. Like neither side inherently has ultimate belief or ultimate structure or knowledge in the universe. It's just like they're just taking action on each other, but they're also limited. But one maybe has more power than the other. Like maybe A has like, missiles and shit, and B only has shields. So A sends its missiles over, and that's the same way, like, something conjuring these negative energies or negative spirits or whatever to fight the more, or like to send over to the more modern side. And that's why we get these really scary, crazy experiences that humans in modern day experience.
Speaking of entities, we can move on to story 5, which is about doppelgängers.
That's a creepy concept. Doppelgängers, yep.
Yeah. For the people that don't know what doppelgängers are, you want to give us a quick explanation about them?
So my understanding of a doppelganger is essentially just a being that can mimic your form or some kind of form of something that you know or love or have intimate knowledge of or whatever. So like I think it could even be like a dog or like, a pet. It could be something that it's almost like a changeling, so to speak, because it's taking on the form of something, either yourself or something and trying to trick you and other people into thinking that it is the original. In all of the video games or whatever, like anything I've ever read or played, it's always negative, right? I think about like The Witcher or whatever, like the doppelganger is like, trying to take on the form of somebody else to eventually kill and get rid of that original person so they can reap the rewards of removing them and then taking their place or whatever. And that's kind of like the changeling stories we talked about with Trev, where the fairy replaces the baby because the fairy folk want that fairy to be raised by humans to get like all the benefits of humanity and stuff like that. So that's essentially in a nutshell what a doppelganger is. Or it's a replacement of something in this form, in this human form or near human form, to get the benefits of humanity.
Yep. Thank you for that. So Connor writes, I was meeting up with a date outside of Castle Court Shopping Centre, Belfast. I looked that place up. It looks really nice. As I approached my date from behind, she turned around in shock. She said she had seen me across the road and waved at me. I stood there and smirked, had the same clothes on, and then just walked away. No sooner did she experience that, I popped up behind her. Least to say, she was really freaked out. So apparently, the girl he was meeting up with said that she saw him wave at her across the street and walk off literally seconds before he pops up behind her.
And you're also talking about, like, I looked up this. So you said Castle Court is the shopping center, right?
Yeah, Castle Court Shopping Center.
So yeah, really modern looking, very mall like the same type of malls that we have in America, where they're, you know, large, a lot of shopping, multiple floors. So you're talking about presumably a lot of people, right? So like, that's creepy. I mean, I can see what somebody who would be skeptical of this particular story would say, like, oh, you know, there's so many people. The person she saw was across the street. Maybe that she was just seeing a guy who was flirting with her, who happened to look like similar to her boyfriend or the guy she was waiting for, or Connor or whatever. But in my mind, I would go the opposite direction. I would be like, why would what are the odds that someone looks and dresses just like the person you're going to meet, who locks onto your eyes in a group of many other people, would smile and wave at you? That's super. I mean, out of all the stories, like, I kind of get like more goosebumps about that than like seeing a 7 or 8 foot. Because at least, like, if you saw a 7, 8 foot like demon creature staring at you in the face from 5 feet away, you could be like, oh fuck, you know, like this is
right.
like, you know, just get away. But this is more subtle. This is like, that's creepy. Like something's targeting you, sort of from a distance, like it's closing
like
in.
Uncanny Valley type of shit.
Yeah, like it knows more about you than you know about yourself, sort of thing.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And
So his story continues. The next day, I'm at my parents'. They asked, how was your granny? What do you mean? I responded. They proceeded to tell me that my grandmother had seen me and that I called up to hers. I guess that means visited.
yeah.
She said I was very quiet and acting weird. I told my parents that was impossible because I had been on a date at the time and then went home afterward. So, yeah, my grandmother thought I was at her place, which I wasn't. I haven't been to her home in years. So on the same day, 2 people said they saw me, even though I was somewhere completely different.
So now you're adding more depth to the story, where you're having multiple people and this
On the same
experiencing on the same day.
Yep.
So interesting. So what I think about that is, like, so in the original story, it seemed like the girl was being targeted, right? But now it really does seem more so that the entity's end goal is to remove the person, or to remove Connor from the story, to be completely. But then that's kind of strange. That wouldn't that mean, though, around the same time, same day, there'd have to be multiple entities kind of copying and being him, you know? Like it'd have to be some kind of coordinated effort by more than one spirit or entity or whatever like that. So like I think that's kind of creepy. I mean, I've never heard of anything like that happening.
Or maybe it's the same one that he encountered as a teen or as a kid.
Oh yeah, good point. Like, you know, it locked onto him, and it was like,
Right.
you know, it's kind of like the demon or whatever that creature is, like the one that got away. So it kind of like always has to like touch base with them every once in a while, like kind of like, you know, stalk him on Facebook sort of thing. Like, let me just fuck with this kid for a little bit, because he, you know, he was the one who tripped me up and got me off my game, and
Right.
made, you know, he broke out of my spell or whatever.
Sounds like the makings of a good horror movie. A shadow demon that follows someone throughout their
Oh,
life and
yeah, man. Connor, get on that,
torments
man.
them. Yeah,
Screenplay. Write a
Connor, dude.
screenplay. You need to write a screenplay on this experience and then say it was based on a true story and then patent it or whatever. Get it registered, trademarked, and then try to sell it. And then
Yeah.
then you could be so rich that you don't have to worry about any of this shit anymore.
Yeah, and you can sponsor our show.
Okay, too far. Cut that out. Don't worry about our dumbasses. You just go be successful and rich on your own. We'll try to find our
Yeah,
way.
well, we'll
just keep floundering.
No, we're making our own path here.
I know.
Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah. It was destroyed in a day. Just kidding.
Don't hate.
I'm just kidding. I triggered Chris with Rome.
It fell over centuries, okay?
Okay.
Not a day.
If Chris could reach out and slap the shit out of me over 5,000 miles, he would have done it because Chris loves, he has a raging Roman flagpole for Rome. Or I don't even know. A centurion spear. I don't know.
Divine staff.
There you go. Divine staff.
Yeah. So the next story that he submitted to us is about a blonde girl ghost. So Connor states, in Edenderry Village, the same place along the same row of houses, my ex and her auntie lived there. Well, one day while I was watching TV, I remembered turning around and seeing a girl with blonde hair looking through the door's glass panel. She jumped in surprise and then ran up the stairs. I'm assuming this was after he saw her. Like, I guess the girl got shocked. I was spooked. I didn't hear any footsteps or noises, but I saw a girl in the hallway. My ex's auntie was asking what was wrong with me. I didn't say. And she said, "You didn't see the girl in the hallway, did you?" I was like, "What the fuck?" I did. And she laughed and said, "That's we. She's been living here since I moved in." I couldn't believe it. This is the only ghost I have ever seen, and it looked like a real person. What makes this stranger is one day, the ex's auntie's cousin, was sitting on the chair near the door and kept turning around, looking at the door. Then she jumped and screamed, "There she is again. I see her. I see the ghost girl." Apparently, they said there was also a ghost boy that haunted the home as well. So my understanding from what Connor is saying here is that he was sitting there watching TV, then he turns around, and apparently it sounds like there was a door behind him that was like a glass door where this ghost girl was looking into the room from. And once he saw her, she got scared, which I find interesting. You know, like usually ghosts scare you, and here's like a little girl ghost, like, "Oh shit! Oh fuck! The living guy sees me!" And then just starts running away. See, this one's not that scary. This one's kind of adorable, I guess. It's like you got a little kid that's haunting a home because they don't know how to cross over to the other side or something like that. And it just sounds like they're curious, like, "Oh, what are you doing?" type of thing.
There are so many things to unpack in a story that includes like a child ghost. It's almost like makes me feel kind of bad and sad and upset. Like, I don't know. Some people's inclination is, they don't like kids, or like they even just like are neutral to kids or whatever. And if there's a realm where like a kid dies and like goes to inhabit and they're by themselves, that's kind of like, what the fuck? Like, there's got to be somebody out there on the other side who cares about kids. There's so many people on this side who care about kids. But like, I don't know. That's just the first thing that pops in my head, like that, poor ghost kid being trapped and scared and stuff like that. But that's interesting that they could presumably occupy the other side with so many different layers of evil and good, and just being stuck there in that state. So that kind of like, doesn't that kind of give some credibility? Like, if this really was a little girl ghost, right? Or the ghost of a little girl who used to be a human who died as a little girl, doesn't that give some crazy or creepy credibility to the idea that once you die in that age, like you're that age forever? Like, if you die as a 99-year-old person who's decrepit and creaky knees and feels like shit all the time, does that mean you're stuck in that state on the other side? Like, in that case, why not just try to die? Don't do this. Like, die in your 20s or 30s or whatever, because you're going to go eventually someday. Might as well be stuck in a state where you're like fucking super strong and fast and can think completely and smartly. I don't know. That's just, don't listen to me. Don't try to die in your 20s or 30s, please.
Yeah, don't do that.
Just
don't do that. Dude, just put the wine bottle down.
What? It's beer. It's not wine. It's beer.
Excuse me. But moving on to our second to last story of the night, which I dubbed Robert the Ghost. So Connor says, in the first flat I lived in with my ex, her daughter would talk to a ghost called Robert. Well, one day we found a death certificate of a person that died in 1918 called Robert. We think there was some sort of connection. I would think so. When we moved houses, she still kept seeing Robert. She would also be sleeping in the hallway, even after we put her to bed and closed the baby gate. There was no way for her to open that gate. It was like someone was lifting her and placing her in the hallway. There was a lot of activity around her in the old flat we lived in. The baby monitor would go bonkers, hearing people talking on the other end. Now, I'm aware about interference, but it was just weird. Guess during the day, we'd hear someone knocking on the bathroom door. Then we'd start sleepwalking. My ex came to me and stood there staring at me one time as I was sleeping, and walked back to her sofa. We had broken up, but I was staying there until I could get sorted. She also had postnatal depression. We think this may have attracted negative spirits to this building because, funny enough, every house we both lived in together was haunted. We thought we were being followed or there was some sort of attachment. Our relationship was very toxic. Apparently, shadow spirits love being in places where there is a lot of negativity going on. To be honest, my ex was very abusive to me. All is forgiven now, but at the time, it was very bad. I'm good now, and life is good.
This reminds me of the past stories and instances where we talked about individuals who are in toxic relationships that seem to invite the spirits more so than other people in a certain area, right? So, like, think about that one story we talked about in Gary, Indiana, with the demon house or whatever. In the first part of that story, we heard the idea that there were squatters in the house that occupied the house after all these strange, creepy, demonic experiences happened from another family. But the people who had occupied that house, the squatters, like, they're like, there's nothing here. They're like, I don't experience anything. This house is just a house. It's maybe a little cold, but other than that, like, I don't have any negative energy feelings or any crazy experiences. So maybe there really is some credibility to the idea that as people, some people are more prone to welcoming in these things or these experiences, like even unintentionally through their negative energy and whatnot. But then again, on the flip side of that, like, let's say you have someone who moves into a brand new construction home, unless there's like some tie to the land, but there shouldn't be anything spiritually attached to that home itself because it's a brand new home, right? So when you have, like, let's say there's an abusive father who moves into the new construction home with his family or something, and like they go through a lot of struggles, like, you don't really hear stories about things happening in new construction homes. So then that makes you wonder, like, does there have to be like the perfect nexus of like negative energy and like older home sort of thing? Like, there has to be more than one criteria to meet this sort of thing. So like Connor's story, it's like, he said that he had negative energies associated to his relationships. These experiences seem to follow him around, but he also lives in an area where there's so much rich history and spiritual connection to the land and mysticism. So maybe there has to be more than one node for that to happen.
Yeah, those are some really good points, man. And I completely agree with what you're saying. There has to be some credence to, what people are going through at the time that could potentially attract these negative things to them. Because if you believe in this type of stuff, which I think not everybody, most people listening to this show today have some sort of belief in this one way or another, or else you wouldn't be listening to it. But yeah, I think that's a good point, that whatever psychological state you are in, that could an emotional state that could potentially draw in negativity. Like if you're negative all the time, if you're sad all the time, if you're dealing with an abusive relationship like Connor had to deal with. So I could completely see how those two things can be related. But going on to our final story of the night, which talks about some of his childhood hauntings.
I think this is going to be one of my favorite ones because I had already perused this, and there's some really creepy angles that aren't quite the same as other stories that he's experienced. So I'm excited for this last one.
Me too, because it reminds me of some of the things that I went through. So, all right, folks, last story of the night. If you made it this far, we really appreciate you. There's so much more I could tell. In my childhood home, there was a phantom door rapper. On someone knocking on the door. Not the wind. For years, it would knock on the door. It would happen at like 1, 2, or 3 in the morning. Even my friends that would stay over would complain about it. When we were kids, my sister would hear children playing in the hallway, and so did my dad. He would think it was us, but we would be sleeping at that same time. We received weird phone calls as well. For years, a random person would call and just breathe into the phone. We even went so far as to have a priest bless the house. Now, I was very young and can't really remember why he was there, but he did go room to room with incense and a Bible, blessing the home. But my childhood was very rough. I mention all this because I think these spirits love bad happenings and depressed people or addiction, drugs, or emotionally unstable people. They will make a person who is having a good life miserable on purpose when they spot a weakness. So yes, I think these things can happen to anyone, but when you are in a certain mental state, especially a lower vibrational state, it calls to them.
Very good way to wrap up. I really like that this is the last story because, I mean, I don't know. I want to give you, let me give Chris the opportunity first to tackle this because I think we both have a lot to talk about, but I've been kind of stealing the thunder initially for this story. So Chris, I'm going to toss it to you real quick. What's the first thing that jumps out to you from this particular experience that he had?
The fact that he's not the only one experiencing it. You have an adult verifying this experience. And I think that's one of the things that gives it so much credence. Because often you hear of adults just completely brushing it off, sweeping it under the rug. Oh, you're hearing things. Oh, it's the wind. But no, it sounds like Connor's father really took this seriously. He heard the knocking on the door. They all experienced the phone calls. They all heard children playing in the hallway, specifically his dad. He goes to check on the kids and they're fucking sleeping. but somehow there's sounds of children playing in the hallway. Like, what the fuck? And to get to the point where you call a priest in to bless the house? Like, what more do you need? Honestly, like this is just, I agree with you. This was a good story to end on because it's just as creepy as the first.
It'd be, it would be really fun. I mean, I say fun, but and honestly, like I don't know what direction it would go. It'd be more interesting than anything than fun. If you had the time and the energy and the resources to go through and talk to as many religious leaders as possible, not just priests, but like leaders of every single faith in the modern era. I mean, it'd be way too difficult to try to do like into the middle or early era, like, those parts of religion, the parts of the world where they still have those ancient old traditions and beliefs. So I don't know if you could even really resonate with some of those people or get what you're looking for. But if you could like tap into the more modern experience, like let's say you live in a town, for instance, where Connor grew up in Ireland, where it's like, oh, there's some priests there, and there was clearly at least one priest that is knowledgeable about potential exorcisms or blessings of locations that kind of thwart or circumvent other energies or other spirits that might be malevolent against a family who's probably Christian or some kind of Catholicism or whatever. So like, if you can go and talk to these guys and gals or whatever across the faiths and be like, hey, how many times have you gone to a house to bless it because the family had some kind of weird experiences? And then ask them also, like, what percentage would you say that, like, out of all those homes you've gone to bless or all those experiences, what percentage would you say are being truthful, and what percentage is kind of either misled or misguided or just completely fabricating the whole thing? There has to be like a subsect of a subsect where it's like, yeah, you're going to find a group of spiritual leaders who know what they're talking about, who have seen this shit happen. They know that there's something going on. They might not know exactly what's going on, but there's something going on. I just think that that's the first thing that pops into my mind when I think about this story is like, you have a priest coming, like you said, there's more than one person experiencing it, and there's something more going on to that depth where they require external assistance. So I would start there. Like, I wish we had time. We should try to get like a couple priests from different faiths on and see what experience, like real experiences they have. And then of course you kind of have to like wonder if there's a level of bullshit there for some people. But I remember that one guy from the demon house story from
oh yeah,
he's like, we weren't really sure if he was like, sometimes he seemed like he was in it for himself in the church that he was like specifically tailored to. So like, you really never know what the human motivation is, even for like a priest or like from some holy person's, like quote unquote holy person. You don't know what their real motivation is. So you have to be kind of taking it with a grain of salt. But at the same time, I'm sure like Trev talked about people, like he talked to some guy or some priest or whatever who was performing exorcisms, and he's like, hey, what do you think is happening here? And the priest is like, I don't know. I don't know what's happening, but something is happening. And then those are the people you want to find to really pick their brains over. And that really, I think that's missing from these stories, is like, you got to have that external perspective. You can't just have two dumbasses like us talking about this all day and speculating. Like, we have to get some formative empirical data in from somebody who has been injected into these scenarios, like an extra perspective. So I don't know. I would start there.
Yeah, that makes sense. That was the final story of the night. And I will say, Connor, thank you so much for submitting your story to us. We really appreciate it. And I found them to be entertaining and very creepy as well. I got goosebumps reading them. And I'm sure Dean got goosebumps listening to my dumbass narrating them.
Your smooth, chocolatey voice, you mean?
But folks, if you want your stories to appear on an episode or have an episode dedicated to you like Connor did, please reach out to us at our email address or one of our social media platforms. We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, we're on Facebook. You can email us at twroadpodcast@gmail.com. Again, we would love to do this again. I thoroughly enjoy doing an episode like this. I think it gives a different flavor to what we normally do, where we pick a topic, a paranormal topic, dark history, or true crime, and we just research and discuss it for an hour and a half or two. But it's really nice to have the community share their stories with us. So don't be shy. Submit your stories. We'd love to dedicate an episode to them. And do you have any final words for the people before we head out, Dean?
I can talk about all these Irish experiences all day long. So if you're from Ireland, send us more stories. If you're not from Ireland, if you're from Scotland, the mortal enemies of the Irish. No, I'm just kidding. If you're from like somewhere in Europe,
they're actually great friends.
I know. I found that out from Trev. I know. I'm just kidding. I just think I like to think of it as more funnily, like it's more funny to me to think of them as like being the same, but also hating each other at the same time, but giving each other shit. Like Willie from The Simpsons.
Right. Yeah. Willie. Groundskeeper Willie.
Wasn't there was like an episode of The Simpsons where like they had like two Irish, or like one was like an Irish leprechaun and the other was a Scottish leprechaun, if there's such a thing, and they were like brawling it out or something like that.
I think so.
Damn Scots, they ruined Scotland. No, seriously though, if you have stories, especially if you live in a country that has a rich history like Ireland, it doesn't matter what part of the world you're from. It could be Europe, it could be the Balkans, it could be South America, where if you're listening and you like live in a place where there's like a much deeper, which is that's comparatively to America, statistically speaking, you live in a part of the world where there's way more depth of history than the United States. So if you live in the United States, you have a good story, please reach out to us. We're not trying to short sack anybody from the US, but especially if you live in some place that has a rich cultural history and like a deep historical background, with many religions, many faiths, like many layers of faith or anything like spiritual that ties into your stories. We love that stuff. Like we love to talk about it and we love to ponder over it. And like we always say when it comes to this podcast, like we want to be successful, but this is really therapeutic for us. Like this is very interesting to us. This makes life more interesting. It makes life more fun and unraveling the mystery, so to speak. So please give us, if you want to be on the show, you're more than welcome to tell these stories yourself, and we will never pick them apart. We will never scrutinize you. We will never tear your stories apart. We'll always be respectful and open-minded. And if you don't want to be on the show, that's totally cool too. Just do what Connor did. Just write up your script and send it our way, and we'll peruse it, do our research, and we'll just kind of riff off it as we did today. Submissions welcome.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a rating on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And please share the show with your friends, as that would help us grow immensely. Also be sure to follow us on social media. You can find us on TikTok at twroadpodcast, our Instagram at twroadpodcast, and our Facebook by searching for The Wandering Road Podcast. If you'd like to get a hold of us, you can reach us at our email address, twroadpodcast@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. We would love to have you on the show as a guest so you can share your stories, or you could submit email submissions of your stories that we could dedicate an episode to. Thanks, and we'll catch you on the next one.